A devastating Russian missile strike shattered the solemnity of Palm Sunday in Sumy, Ukraine, claiming 34 lives, including 7 children, instantly drawing international condemnation. The European Union called for an immediate truce. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni labeled it a cowardly attack, and White House envoy Keith Kellogg remarked that the act surpassed decency. Against this backdrop of immediate tragedy and calls for de-escalation, sharply divergent narratives regarding the conflict's responsibility and trajectory have crystallized. Former U.S. President Donald Trump places culpability broadly, stating that while President Putin should not have started it, President Biden and President Zelensky should have stopped it, terming the conflict Biden's war and asserting his own efforts toward cessation. Conversely, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky frames the situation as an existential threat with global implications, warning that failure to firmly resist President Putin could lead to further Russian advances aimed at rebuilding an empire, potentially encroaching on NATO territory and risking a world war. President Zelensky extended a direct invitation to Mr. Trump to visit Kiev and witness the conflict's reality firsthand. These starkly opposing perspectives emerge amid ongoing, intense hostilities and complex diplomatic maneuvers, demanding closer examination. Mr. Trump expanded on this assessment, suggesting the conflict escalated partly because Ukraine engaged a significantly larger power while anticipating external missile support, simultaneously forecasting imminent good proposals for peace originating from his own initiative. He maintained the conflict represented a failure of the Biden administration and asserted his own presidency was marked by respect from adversaries, including President Putin, which he claims prevented such wars. On the ground, however, the conflict's brutal reality persists unabated. Russian artillery and rocket fire continue to inflict civilian casualties, exemplified by recent deaths in Kharkiv Oblast communities like Kupiansk and Shevchenkov. Adding a deeply concerning dimension, Ukraine's General Intelligence Directorate reports the systematic use by Russian forces of chemical agents, specifically Argivo gas grenades delivered by drone, particularly near Sherbaki in the Zaporizhia region, resulting in casualties among defenders. This practice is described as increasingly systemic, employed when conventional battlefield objectives prove elusive. Moscow provides its own rationale for such actions, framing the deadly Sumy strike not as an attack on civilians, but as a targeted hit on a Ukrainian command meeting, further accusing Kiev of using its populace as human shields by placing military assets in dense urban areas. This narrative is coupled with explicit warnings from the Kremlin regarding Western military aid. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated German provision of Taurus cruise missiles would inevitably trigger escalation, a sentiment echoed harshly by Dmitry Medvedev, who directly threatened German official Friedrich Merz over suggestions the missiles could target the Kerch Bridge connecting Russia to Crimea. The strategic situation reflects this intensity, with Ukrainian authorities evacuating civilians from the vital road and rail hub of Pokrovsk in Donetsk due to relentless Russian attacks. Concurrently, analysis from the Institute for the Study of War suggests Russian officials may be exploiting vague ceasefire terms. Reports also indicate Ukrainian setbacks near the Kursk region, losing substantial territory gained the previous August, retaining only a small defensive foothold towards Sumy, a shift attributed partly to interruptions in American aid and intelligence support. This operational picture underscores the high tempo of Russian drone and missile attacks documented since Ukraine's acceptance of a ceasefire proposal, even while energy infrastructure has reportedly been largely spared recently. Amidst this military friction, diplomatic and symbolic gestures unfold. Ukraine is organizing a counterparade in Kiev for May 9th, inviting European leaders in a show of unity against Russian actions, contrasting with Moscow's traditional Victory Day celebrations. Separately, negotiations between the United States and Ukraine regarding a strategic mineral resources agreement have resumed, described as constructive and focusing on technical and legal details, signaling ongoing strategic engagement despite the conflict and previous political derailments impacting the deal. European allies reinforce the sense of urgency expressed by Kiev. Italy's Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani viewed the Sumy attack as definitive proof that Russia does not genuinely seek peace. EU High Representative Kaja Kallas, implicitly referencing Mr. Trump's remarks, urged maximum pressure on Russia to halt the violence, emphasizing that continued military assistance, like her progressing ammunition initiative, remains essential for Ukraine's self-defense against ongoing aggression. This confluence of events underscores a fundamental divergence in framing the conflict. One perspective, articulated notably by former President Trump, emphasizes past decisions and assigns distributed responsibility among leaders in Moscow, Washington, and Kiev for the war's initiation and continuation, suggesting a potentially negotiable resolution predicated on different leadership approaches or forthcoming proposals. In direct opposition stands the view championed by President Zelensky and echoed by key European allies, which focuses squarely on ongoing Russian actions perceived as inherently aggressive and expansionist. This interpretation posits that only sustained, firm resistance backed by international military and diplomatic pressure can prevent further Russian advances and avert a catastrophic escalation, potentially leading to a wider conflict threatening global security. Moscow's justifications for its actions, such as claiming the Sumy strike targeted military command or accusing Ukraine of using human shields, directly contradict the international perception reflected in statements decrying the attack as cowardly and indecent. Similarly, Russia's explicit threats of escalation tied to specific Western military aid, like the potential supply of German Taurus missiles, contrast sharply with Ukraine's efforts to bolster international solidarity through symbolic acts like the planned May 9th counterparade and practical measures, such as pursuing strategic resource agreements with partners like the United States. The operational environment itself reflects these tensions: ongoing intense combat, reported use of prohibited chemical substances, civilian evacuations forced by military pressure, and documented territorial shifts influenced by factors including the flow of international aid, all occur simultaneously with these high-level diplomatic maneuvers and competing narratives about blame and risk. Delving deeper, the strategic implications of these divergent narratives are significant. The focus by former President Trump on assigning blame retrospectively, particularly involving current U.S. and Ukrainian leadership, injects a distinct element of political uncertainty into the Western coalition's approach, potentially influencing debates over the nature and duration of future support commitments. This contrasts directly with the Ukrainian and allied European emphasis on present danger and future risk, a framing designed to galvanize continued, unwavering international backing as essential for regional and global stability. Moscow's accompanying rhetoric appears calculated to exploit divisions and deter specific actions. The justification offered for the Sumy attack, portraying it as a legitimate military strike complicated by alleged Ukrainian tactics, aims to deflect international condemnation and shape the narrative around civilian casualties. Furthermore, the explicit threats targeting potential German missile deliveries function as clear signals intended to establish red lines and raise the perceived costs for Western nations considering the provision of more advanced offensive capabilities to Kiev, thereby influencing their internal decision-making processes. The operational consequences of fluctuations in external support are not merely theoretical. The reported Ukrainian pullback from significant territory near the Kursk region, attributed directly to pauses in American aid and intelligence sharing, demonstrates the material impact of logistical and support pipelines on frontline dynamics. This underscores the tangible link between high-level political and strategic decisions made far from the battlefield and the immediate tactical realities faced by forces engaged in combat. In this complex environment, non-military initiatives acquire heightened importance. The ongoing, constructive discussions concerning U.S.-Ukraine mineral resource agreements represent efforts to build long-term economic resilience and strategic partnerships, looking beyond the immediate conflict. Similarly, symbolic actions like the planned May 9th counterparade in Kiev serve not only as morale boosters, but also as diplomatic tools aimed at reinforcing European unity and visually countering Russian narratives on a historically significant date. Considering the broader context, the situation reveals a conflict landscape increasingly defined not just by kinetic engagements, but by a parallel war of narratives with profound international implications. The stark dichotomy between assigning historical responsibility and emphasizing imminent existential risk creates a challenging diplomatic environment, potentially hindering unified international action or the formulation of broadly acceptable conditions for conflict resolution. Moscow's strategy of coupling military actions with specific justifications and targeted escalation threats appears designed to influence Western decision-making on military aid, introducing calculated ambiguity and raising the stakes for providing certain types of support. This dynamic places external actors in a difficult position, balancing the imperative to support Ukraine, as voiced by figures like Casualties, against the explicit warnings emanating from the Kremlin regarding potential consequences. The documented operational realities, including intense barrages, alleged chemical weapons use, and territory changing hands based partly on aid fluctuations, serve as a constant, grim reminder of the war's human cost and the direct link between strategic choices and battlefield outcomes. Ultimately, the combination of relentless military operations, deeply polarized political discourse heavily influenced by figures like former President Trump, persistent Russian threats, and ongoing diplomatic efforts paints a picture of profound strategic volatility, where the potential for miscalculation or unintended escalation, as warned by President Zelensky, remains a significant and present concern. The trajectory, therefore, appears set by interacting forces. Persistent Russian military pressure met by Ukrainian resistance reliant on fluctuating external support, overlaid by starkly different political interpretations of responsibility and risk. Each major event, like the Sumy attack, serves not only as a human tragedy, but also as a catalyst for reinforcing these competing narratives, one side seeing proof of inherent Russian aggression requiring continued defiance, the other citing it within a framework of shared blame and potentially avoidable conflict. Diplomatic initiatives, whether symbolic like the planned Kiev parade or practical like the resource negotiations, proceed in parallel but seem insufficient on their own to alter the fundamental dynamics shaped by battlefield events and major power stances. The result is a situation where military realities, such as civilian deaths in Kharkiv or alleged chemical use in Zaporizhia, coexist uneasily with promises of imminent peace proposals from figures like Mr. Trump and dire warnings of global war from President Zelensky. This complex interplay leaves the international community navigating a path fraught with difficult choices, balancing humanitarian concerns, strategic interests, and the ever-present risk of the conflict widening, driven by actions on the ground and the rhetoric surrounding them. Consequently, the international response becomes fragmented. Calls for truces or condemnations of specific attacks coexist with deeper disagreements on the conflict's root causes and optimal path forward, influenced significantly by differing assessments from key figures like Mr. Trump and President Zelensky. This divergence directly impacts the strategic calculations of supporting nations, as the narrative emphasizing shared blame potentially weakens the political case for open-ended, high-intensity military aid, contrasting sharply with the narrative of existential threat which demands precisely such support. As a direct outcome of this complex political landscape, Moscow perceives opportunities to exert influence through targeted threats, linking potential Western arms deliveries like the German Taurus missiles to declared escalatory consequences, thereby aiming to shape Allied policy debates from the outside. The tangible effects of these dynamics are observable on the battlefield, where disruptions in established aid flows, such as the reported halt in American support, demonstrably correlate with adverse tactical outcomes for Ukrainian forces, illustrating the immediate operational consequences of strategic-level decisions and political friction. Moreover, reports of extreme measures, including the alleged systematic deployment of chemical agents by Russian forces, serve to intensify the conflict's brutality and fuel the narrative promoted by Kiev regarding the nature of the threat, inevitably hardening positions and complicating any potential negotiation framework reliant on mutual trust or adherence to established norms of warfare. Thus, the conflict progresses under the shadow of profoundly incompatible interpretations regarding its origins and necessary resolution, shaping both the military actions on the ground and the strategic postures of international actors. The operational tempo remains high, marked by significant violence and allegations of severe conduct, directly influenced by the ebb and flow of external support, which is itself subject to these competing political narratives. Consequently, diplomatic efforts and symbolic gestures coexist with, but do not fundamentally alter, a landscape defined by immediate battlefield pressures, calculated Russian deterrent signaling, and the palpable risk, articulated by Ukrainian leadership and underscored by the ongoing hostilities, that the current trajectory holds significant potential for wider destabilization. The situation remains inherently volatile, caught between clashing strategic visions and the unyielding realities of warfare. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis, and be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more geopolitical insights like this. I love hearing your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Share this video with anyone interested in deeper perspectives on current events. Until next time, stay informed and think critically. Thank you.